Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You know, many of us carry an invisible armor that we're not always aware of. And it's because maybe over time we've learned that we need to put an armor, maybe put up a front in front of people that we don't totally feel 100% safe around. And you know, it serves as a protection. But something beautiful about the Quran is that when we come to it, because it's a safe space, it is the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator of my heart, gifted me with these words of heart. And in the Quran, when I'm diving into it, I can unleash that armor. I can release that armor completely and be exactly who I am, the way I am, the way Allah created me. And sometimes as we're approaching the Quran, it could be one word that helps us feel held and carried through a moment. You know, perhaps sometimes we're going through life and pushing through, and then suddenly maybe you get to this ayah that says وَجَزَاهُمْ بِمَا صَبَرُوا, that Allah will reward them based on their sabr. And maybe for that moment you just release and you find comfort in the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just told you that sabr is seen, that perseverance, that push you continue to exert for His sake is seen and noted and rewarded by Him. And it's those small moments in the Quran that if we capitalize on them, we will feel held and carried and will be able to push through this life with more grace and more divine carrying, inshallah. And this is what I invite all of you to come to these Quranic Ocean classes. In a 10-month program, we'll be diving into Juz' 30, the final Juz' of the Quran. And it's not the ordinary tafsir classes where we go through the meanings of the Quran, but this is where together we can embrace our whole self authentically and come to the Quran releasing that armor, aware of who we are as we're coming to the Quran. Sometimes we'll be only covering 2 or 3 verses a week, just so we can really have tama'un, really soak up the entire verse and what it's telling me as an individual. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَقَدْ أَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكُمْ كِتَابًا فِيهِ ذِكْرُكُمْ, that this Quran has your mention in it. So how can you find yourself here? How can you find your potential here? And you know, I tell many people that my daughter Maryam, who cannot speak, she cannot communicate verbally, she memorized a surah of the Quran in a way that I never thought would be possible, but she memorized it through writing. And subhanallah, here is where Allah shows us perhaps a glimpse of this verse, that you will find yourself in the Quran. She found a potential in herself through these words. Imagine what we can find. Imagine what potential we can find in His words. And to give you another example, in the juz that we're going to dive into, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ثُمَّ شَقَقْنَا الْأَرْضَ شَقًّا, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala splits the earth into like splitting over and over again. And then immediately after He says, فَأَنْبَتْنَا فِيهَا حَبًّا, and then in that splitting we grew crops out of it. And occasionally you can see that verse and brush over it without reflecting. But inshallah, in these classes together, we'll stop at that verse, put a halt and say, look what Allah is saying, that in the split growth was produced. And perhaps in the split that you're experiencing in your life, maybe a hardship that came or a circumstance that befell suddenly that you didn't expect, that you feel like is splitting you open, perhaps that is where growth will happen. And these are verses that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gifts us in the Quran so we can grow too. So I invite you, dear sister, to join us in this 10-month program, inshallah. Week by week we'll be diving into verses of the Quran where we can release that armor together and be embraced by His words. Join us today. Link is in my bio.